Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41, entitled, Jesus Stills a Storm, from the New Revised Standard Version, the NRSV. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" I invite us now to hear the same passage, Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41, but from the Common English Bible translation. Here it is entitled, Jesus Stops a Storm. Later that day, when evening came, Jesus said to them, "Let us cross over to the other side of the lake." They left the crowd and took him in the boat just as he was. Other boats followed along. A gale-force wind arose, and waves crashed against the boat, so that the boat was swamped. But Jesus was in the rear of the boat, sleeping on a pillow. They woke him up and said, "Teacher, don't you care that we're drowning?" He got up and gave orders to the wind. He said to the lake, "Silence, be still." The wind settled down, and there was a great calm. Then Jesus asked them, "Why are you frightened? Don't you have faith yet?" Overcome with awe, they said to each other, "Who then is this? Even the wind and the sea obey him." Here, in the Gospel of Mark, we read that Jesus has been preaching and teaching for a substantial amount of time. Parable after parable, story after story, Jesus has been presenting the kingdom of God and the tenets of faith using agricultural imagery and language. The parable of the sower, the teaching of the kingdom of God as it relates to a lamp under a bushel basket. The parable of the growing seed, the parable of the mustard seed. Parable after parable, story after story. Jesus has been presenting God's wisdom and God's nature of love with language and references that people understood. Then in verse 35, we read that evening had come, and Jesus informs his disciples it is time to move on. Jesus says to them, "Let us go to the other side." So Mark writes that Jesus gets into a boat, as other boats were with him, as they set off, leaving the crowd on the shore. A small fleet of boats start off at twilight to cross open waters at night. Then suddenly a great storm arose with gale-force winds and waves that crashed against the sides of their boats. Waves were beating against the sides of the boat with such ferocity and consistency that the boat became swamped. The boats were filling up with water. The boats were beginning to sink. Where is Jesus? What is he doing during such perilous times? Mark writes that Jesus was sleeping throughout all of this at the back end of the boat. His disciples wake Jesus in the midst of the storm, and they say to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are about to die?" We, as readers and hearers of the gospel, must remember that many of Jesus' disciples were seasoned fishermen. They know the peril that they are currently experiencing in this moment from their years of knowledge and expertise. We know from their background and now their display of great fear that this storm is not like many other storms. This storm is truly threatening their lives. Jesus gets up, leaves the cushion he was sleeping on, and orders the wind to be still. Peace, be still. Silence, no more. This storm has ended. It is finished. Peace, be still. And the wind settled down, and there was great calm, stillness in the darkness, maybe even new light as the storm clouds roll away and stars begin to appear. And in the stillness, in the calm, Jesus asked his disciples, "Why are you so frightened? Why are you afraid? Have you no faith yet?" What an insensitive thing to say, we may find ourselves thinking. Jesus, do you not realize that your followers were just fighting for their lives against a force that was threatening their existence? A force that came from seemingly out of nowhere, with no apparent end, a natural occurrence of such a magnitude that your beloved followers had to battle for their lives with no guarantee of success or survival. Jesus, did you not hear them yell for each other? Did you not see them working so hard to stay alive? Jesus, please be a bit more sensitive with your disciples. It is very scary to be overwhelmed and feeling like the world is out of control by natural occurrences that threaten your life and the lives of the people that you love. We find ourselves offended by Jesus' words as we empathize with the soaking wet disciples. But then suddenly, we remember what Jesus first said here in this gospel account. The soft whisper of our soul repeats Jesus' first words. Let us go to the other side. Do you still not have faith yet in what I say? Let us, all of us, go and therefore make it to the other side. In the midst of the storm, it appears that the disciples did not believe that Jesus would get them to the other side. Jesus has spoken many things to God's beloved creation, especially when God's creation was about to endure great hardship and be exposed to great suffering as a result of overwhelming earthly powers. These past few weeks, I have thought often of Jesus' words to the disciples. Let us go to the other side. We find ourselves now in the midst of an overwhelming natural occurrence that threatens the existence of God's beloved creation. We are weary from battling the pandemic that is causing so many to perish. But in the midst of the raging storm, we have faith that God will see us through to the other end. Faith and compassion for others will see us through to the other side of this most devastating time. Recognizing that we have spent our time together now, meditating on God's words of faith, I would like to offer a moment to acknowledge the bravery of the disciples. Though they are filled with fear and probably doubt, they do not turn back. And that, for me, is amazing. In the moment when gale force winds and crashing waves threaten their lives, they do not turn back. They keep going, keep fighting, keep trying to make it through the seemingly impossible odds. And such a scene reminds me of the words spoken by President Theodore Roosevelt when he delivered his speech entitled Citizenship in a Republic. There, on April 23rd, 1910, in Paris, President Roosevelt said this: "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows with great enthusiasm the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat."